Have you ever wondered who established one of the most important and beneficial organizations that helps people in need of assistance in natural disasters and many other devastating life events? This heroic person was Clara Barton. During her lifetime, Clara Barton was one of the most recognized heroes during the American Civil War. In her early life, Clara Barton was an educator but found her true desire to help wounded soldiers on and off the battlefield in the Civil War. When the war was no longer existing, Clara worked to identify missing and deceased soldiers and founded the American Red Cross. Clara also founded many different organizations. Clara's life was dedicated to the well-being of others, and her life had a lasting impact on caregiving and disaster relief in America and throughout the world. Today, Barton's legacy lives on through the American Red Cross. With the help from the American Red Cross, this organization has helped more than 2 million people. Clarissa Harlow Barton was born on December 25, 1821 in Oxford, Massachusetts to Stephen Barton and Sarah Stone. Clara was born into an abolitionist family. Clara's love for nursing most likely started when her brother, David, fell from their family barn and suffered a traumatic head injury, and she nursed him for nearly 2 years. After receiving a formal education, Clara became a teacher at the age of 15. 12 years later, Clara established and became the headmaster of a free school in New Jersey where 600 students eventually enrolled. Clara eventually left the school because the school board voted to replace her position with a male. Clara then moved to Washington, D.C. and became an office clerk for the U.S. Patent Office, and she was paid the same amount that her male peers were. Clara Barton once said, "I may sometimes be willing to teach for nothing, but if paid at all, I shall never do a man's work for less than a man's pay." Clara Barton was working for the U.S. Patent Office when the Civil War began on April 12, 1861. A week later, many soldiers from the 6th Massachusetts Infantry were attacked by people who agreed with the ways and beliefs of the South, and the wounded were scattered among the streets of Washington, D.C. A makeshift hospital was made at the uncompleted Capitol building. Often described as shy, Clara felt a desire to care for the injured by bringing them food and other necessities. As the demand for care and medical provisions grew larger, Clara gathered provisions from her home and led a campaign to obtain additional relief items from close friends and the public. Clara spent hours with the homesick, suffering soldiers, nursing the wounded back to health, writing letters, and offering kind words and prayers for comfort. Without the help of formal training, Clara's nursing expertise came from common sense, courage, and compassion. After witnessing the emotional state of battle-weary soldiers in Washington, D.C., Clara realized that the greatest need for care and supplies was in the makeshift hospitals near the front. In 1862, Clara was granted permission to take bandages and other supplies to a battlefield hospital after the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Northern Virginia. From then on, Clara traveled with the Union Army. On September 17, 1862, Clara arrived at the Battle of Antietam. After dropping the large wagon load of medical supplies to grateful surgeons who were struggling to make bandages out of corn husks off, she worked deep into the night. Clara would assist the surgeons, help with cooking food for the soldiers, and tending the wounded, despite the shooting bullets overhead. One unlucky soldier was shot and killed as Clara tended him. Later on, Clara stated, "A ball had passed between my body and the right arm which supported him, cutting through his chest from shoulder to shoulder. There was no more to be done for him, and I left him to his rest. I have never mended that hole in my sleeve. I wonder if a soldier ever does mend a bullet hole in his coat." Clara made a profound impression on the Union Army medic surgeons at Antietam. Dr. James Dunn once said of Clara Barton, "In my feeble estimation, General McClellan, with all his laurels, sinks into insignificance without the true heroine of age, the angel of the battlefield." Clara continued to assist the Union Army at Petersburg, Virginia, Fredericksburg, Fort Wagner, South Carolina, along with many other places. Even Clara's best efforts could not conquer the disease and infection during rampant warfare. In Charleston, South Carolina, Clara became deathly ill and was transported to Hilton Head Island. It was eventually transported to Washington, D.C. to recuperate. After she had recovered, Clara gathered more supplies and went back to the battlefield. Whenever it was possible, Clara recorded the personal information of the soldiers she had cared for. As the war progressed, Clara was often called upon to correspond with her family members of the missing, dead, or wounded soldiers. After returning to Washington, D.C. in January of 1865, after the death of her brother, she continued her letter-writing campaign from home. Clara's efforts didn't go unnoticed. President Abraham Lincoln requested Clara to be the general correspondent for the Friends of Paroled Prisoners. Clara's job was to find missing soldiers and to inform their families of their fate if all possible. This job was too big to do independently, so Claire formed the Bureau of Records of Missing Men of the Armies of the United States, along with 12 clerks. With the help of these people and the Bureau of Records, they researched the status of tens of thousands of soldiers and answered over 63,000 letters. By the time Clara left her position and presenting her final report to the Congress in 1869, she and her assistants had identified 22,000 missing soldiers, but she had believed 40,000 were still unaccounted for. In 1869, Clara Barton traveled to Europe for rest and learned about the International Red Cross in Geneva, Switzerland, which had established an international agreement known as the Geneva Treaty. Now known as the Geneva Convention, this lays out rules for the care of the sick and wounded in wartime. When the Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870, Clara wore a red cross made out of ribbon and helped deliver supplies to needy citizens that were in war zones. After Clara had returned to the United States, she solidified politician support for America to enter the Geneva Treaty. President Chester A. Arthur finally signed the treaty in 1882, and the American Association of Red Cross, later known as the American Red Cross, was born, with Clara as the leader. As the head of the American Red Cross, Clara focused mainly on disaster relief, including helping victims of the deadly Johnstown flood in Pennsylvania and devastating hurricanes and tidal waves in South Carolina and in Galveston, Texas. Clara also sent relief supplies overseas to victims of war and famine. Clara played an integral role in the passing of the American Amendment to the Geneva Treaty in 1884, which expanded the role of the International Red Cross to include assisting victims of natural disasters. Although it may have seemed like everything wasn't perfect in Clara's Red Cross. Clara was reported as an independent workaholic who fiercely protected her vision of what the Red Cross should be. Clara also suffered from depression, although nothing alarmed her more than an urgent call for help. Clara's authoritative leadership approach and supposed mismanagement of funds forced her to resign posts in 1904. In 1905, Clara established the National First Aid Association of America, which made first aid kits and worked closely with local fire and police departments to create ambulance brigades. Clara Barton died on April 12, 1912, at her home in Glen Echo, Maryland, at the age of 91. A monument of Clara's honor stands at the Antietam National Battlefield. During the Civil War, Clara served on 16 battlefields during the Civil War. Whether working tirelessly behind the scenes to obtain supplies, prepare meals, arrange makeshift hospitals, or tending the wounded during some of the glorious battles in American history, she earned the respect of countless soldiers, officers, surgeons, and politicians. Clara almost single-handedly changed the popular viewpoint that women were too weak to work on battlefields. Without Clara's influence, the American Red Cross would not exist. Clara believed in equal rights and helped everyone, regardless of race, gender, or economic station. Clara brought attention to the great need of disaster victims and established many first aid, emergency preparedness, and emergency response procedures that are still used by the American Red Cross.